Sorry about that. So welcome back. Welcome back. Apologize. Again, we're in chapter 9. We're going to talk about presentational aids in this unit. We're going to talk about how they're useful, what they're used for, the different types, why we use them, and even low-tech presentational aids, because they can be of value too. So presentational aids are the resources beyond the speech itself that a speaker uses to enhance the message conveyed to the audience. They appeal to the other senses, and with today's technology, the range of possibilities is infinite. If you notice, I have several different types on here. First of all, Blackboard. We're using a tool that allows for presentational aids. Here I am, right? PowerPoint, another tool I'm using within Blackboard for presentational aids. Other tools include Prezi. Another tool you may want to think about using is, you can even use a PowerPoint video within PowerPoint so that you can record yourself and send me the file. Zoom would be another one. We can use Zoom and then use a different presentational aid within Zoom, like PowerPoint or Prezi. So there's a lot of different ways to go about recording oneself and having presentational aids. The keys to remember, and again, I forgot, sorry, low tech, meaning not using technology at all, but poster board and creative tools like that can be useful, especially in this day where we're bombarded by technology. To use a tool like poster board, it can be valuable. So when you think about the different tools that can be used, it's almost mind-boggling. But simplify it. What do you have experience using? What have you used for other classes and found success with? What have you used before and failed with? All important questions to ask yourself as we're inching ourselves ever closer to where we have to give speeches. Now, the speeches that you'll use presentational aids on are the informational or informative speech, which is speech number 2, and the persuasive speech, speech number 3. Any other speech doesn't require a presentational aid or tool. Now, you need to record yourself, so start thinking about how you're planning on recording yourself. Zoom is a free program. You can download it to your laptop or even cell phone and record your lesson, record your speech on that. And again, like I said, it's free. I love free. A little bit of setup, but not very much. So that's a tool that I've used in the past. Of course, I'm using Blackboard for this school and PowerPoint for this school. But there's a lot of tools out there. I want you to think about it. Start considering it as the speeches will inch ever closer. So some basic concepts about presentation aids. Well, first of all, it makes sense, right? Aids must be relevant. They must be real to what you're speaking about. If they aren't related, well, they lose effectiveness and it distracts. Even worse, it distracts from your speech. You could lose the audience altogether. The presentational aids must add something as well. They must give you something, bring something to light, add a different element, if you will. They're great ways to present statistics and fun facts about the topic you're speaking about. The presentational aid must be used at the same time you're speaking about them so that it correlates. It makes sense to the viewer, to the listener, to the audience. The aids must be easy to use because you don't want to have a technology fail. Right? The aids must be visible and audible and easy for the audience to understand. All right. So think about it. If you're going to play a video as part of your speech, which you could do, key to that is remember anytime you play a video or something like that within your speech, I don't count that as speech time. That's just utilizing a tool to give yourself another element to fulfill that presentational aids part. So it must be visible, meaning the audience must be able to see it, must be audible, hearable for the audience, and easy enough for the audience to understand. Functions of presentational aids, well, really, they improve audience understanding through clarifying and emphasizing. Really, those are the keys. Presentational aids are there to help clear things up and give the audience extra information, emphasize important information. Right? They aid in the retention and recall for the audience, meaning it will help the audience get more out of your speech. They also add variety and interest to your speech. If you notice, my PowerPoints, they're not all exactly the same, but they are similar in color, similar in layout. I try to keep it somewhat uniform, but I do create interesting graphics, things of that nature to just kind of keep us focused on what it is we're here for, which is public speaking. And honestly, the one of the biggest and most understated tools is it enhances the speaker's credibility if you do it well. If you correlate your slides with your delivery, then yes, it gives you more credibility and helps people think, wow, that was an awesome speech. Here you see some low tech visual aids like charts and graphs that you can put up, pictures, right? Objects that you could hold. And one student give a speech on how to change a spare tire, and he literally walked us through the steps. So he had multiple visual aids there. He had his tire wrench, he had his jack, and the spare tire. So there was quite a bit going on there. Now, some common problems with presentational aids are overkill, meaning having too many aids or too much technology that's too sophisticated with the aid, and then you have that technology fail. And that's bad. It's happened to almost all of us at some point. Remember, sometimes things happen, technology doesn't work, furniture is moved, you can't always plug in exactly where you thought you were going to, the internet goes down. These all happen. These are real problems in the real world. So think about those things as well. Remember that the aids don't always speak for themselves, meaning sometimes we have to explain them to our audience and interpret them for our audience so that our audience gets the biggest picture and gets the most emphasis from those presentational aids. I mentioned charts. Charts are powerful. They're statistical based. They can be complicated, and they definitely do not speak for themselves. In this case, if you look at this chart, you will have no idea what this chart represents. Fall, collision, struck by object, struck by person, assault, unknown. So this chart by itself doesn't do the job, right? If it were in my speech, I would have to tell you what this chart is about. This chart is about elder abuse and how elder abuse happens, meaning what happens, what are the statistics, what normally happens? Well, falls, how are elderly injured, falls, collisions, struck by objects, struck by other people, and then we have real physical assault, right? More than just a strike, but like someone is really assaulting them. And then there's the unknown, like literally 1.2% was unknown to the public. Whatever happened, the elderly weren't able to describe what had happened. But by itself, this chart doesn't do the job. It can't speak for itself. Now remember, you have to have multiple things to show for a chart to actually be effective. Let's talk about graphs. Graphs can be powerful. Graphs are easier to understand, but they can be misleading. Okay? I'm going to talk about that. So line graphs are great for progression of time. When we think about timelines, right? When things happen, that's a perfect example of you could draw a timeline and explain something, give information about something that's happened over time. We have bar graphs. What you see on the page here is a bar graph, right? We also have pie graphs, which you saw earlier. It's a chart, but it's also a pie graph. And then we have pictograph, which this is a bar pictograph. So it's interesting. It combines two elements. Pictographs are like bars, but then they can be confusing for people. You have to pay attention. Like one vote is a smiley face. Oh, okay. So when we ask, and again, no idea what this is about, right? You see it and you're like, what is this favorite fruit thing? Well, these are students that I was teaching in a program to help Chinese elite students enter into American colleges, universities. So I was helping making sure their skills were up. And one of the things I asked them was what their favorite fruit was. So here we have a culmination of what their favorite fruit was. Now I took dragon fruit off because almost every single one of them said dragon fruit. So I eliminated that because it just wasn't fair. So I said, outside of dragon fruit, what is your favorite fruit? And this is what they came back with. Most of them liked apples, many liked pears, a few liked grapes, and a few liked bananas. Ultimately, you can see each student had a vote. Graphs can be a little bit confusing unless they're clear. Make sure they're drawn in a clear manner so that our audience understands. Always start with 0 as a baseline, because if you don't, it's confusing. You have to be able to explain the graph to the audience. So keep it simple enough and keep it in a manner that you can understand readily. Use color, use clarity and distinction to separate the different sections, right? And always think about ethical considerations, meaning don't stereotype, don't range out, don't come up with something that might be deemed offensive as a color scheme or whatnot. When we think about other presentational aids, again, don't be offensive, please. I'd rather not see something that perpetrates hate, given in a speech. You do have the right to freedom of speech. Remember that. We talked about that early on. But you also have the responsibility of freedom of speech. I don't like to perpetrate hate in my classroom. I won't allow it. So think about it. I've only had one student ever push on that, and the school ended up acting on my behalf, but mainly to curtail the student's behavior because it will eventually get him injured or get someone else injured. So hate, there's no place for hate in the educational system, and there really is no place for hate, honestly, in your lives. Check yourself, please. You waste a lot of energy with hate, so don't do it. That's my advice. Have the freedom to agree and disagree completely, but don't hate. Blind hate is an evil, ugly thing. It ruins people. I actually saw it firsthand. So when I think about this, now let me go ahead and tell the story. So my grandfather is related to Clark. Now, when a historical figure named Clark. Now, whenever I say that, everyone always assumes it's a guy with Lewis and Clark, right? The two guys, they wander around the West, they explore, they come back to Jefferson, give a report, right? It's not that guy. It's his older brother, George Rogers Clark. So, my grandfather had many negative things that happened to him, much like his great 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 grandpa, George Rogers Clark. And both men, ultimately, as they aged out, were consumed with hate and ultimately both became alcoholics. George Rogers Clark was such a key piece of the Revolutionary War. He basically got the United States extra territory, which we wouldn't have had he not made military action against forts along the Mississippi River. So he gets what they call Illinois territory, which is really Indiana and Illinois, a little piece of Kentucky and Wisconsin, all with about 200 people under his leadership. And he attacks some British forts and basically gives the British something else to focus on, another way to split forces so Washington doesn't have to face an additional 1,000 men. Now, George Rogers Clark, much like my grandfather, peaked early in his life and didn't fare well as he aged out. George Rogers Clark had his military success before he was ever age 30. From there, he had a series of bad business decisions. It took him almost 30 years to get compensated for his pay and his losses during the Revolutionary War. Ultimately, when he was compensated, he ended up having to basically sign over the title to most of that land because of debts incurred again over the course of the Revolutionary War. He was too old to lead the Discovery Corps on their quest west of the Mississippi for the Louisiana Purchase. He was too old for that. And by this time, he had become a raging alcoholic, lost his leg due to falling asleep drunkenly at the fire, and his leg caught on fire. He only lived to be about, I don't think he made, yeah, he did make 70. He was in his 60s, which was pretty old, actually, for Revolutionary War time. It wasn't too bad. But George Rogers Clark lived an unhappy life well, pretty much primarily after the Revolutionary War. Seemed like everything he did, he failed at, while his younger brother and his middle brother were quite successful as shopkeepers and expansionists for the Western territories. So ultimately, don't let hate run you. Don't be consumed by it, because pretty soon all it does is fuels other problems, in this case alcoholism, and ultimately cut short a life. That's it. Presentational aids. Other types, right? You can do diagrams. You can draw on a board, right? Photographs, artwork. If you're talking about artists, how better to describe what an artist does than artwork? You see behind me, I have a taste for art. Um, this picture behind me reminds me of the Midwest where I'm from, even though it was painted in France. Maps, if we're talking about the expansion of the United States, as I just did, maps would be crucial. We could see the first few colonies and then how westward expansion kind of took off after that in multiple layers, in multiple ages. Audio and video recording can be used, but remember with those, use with care and preparation, have them queued up. They do not count towards your speech time, so be careful with those. Also, you can use objects or a model. I've had people do makeup or hair for people and actually use a model, but remember the model needs to know what they're supposed to do before they're there, what's expected. Make sure also the models show up, because otherwise it creates a bad situation for your speech, right? Animals. I've had people use animals, but wow, animals are highly distractive. Some people have allergies and fears of animals, so bringing them into a school setting wouldn't be the best. Not to mention our school forbids them in a classroom unless they're animals to help someone, assistance animals. You could use yourself as a presentational aid, right? I've seen people do their own hair and makeup on themselves. Also, again, remember, anytime you use people outside of yourself or even animals, there's going to be a level of unpredictability, especially with animals, how they're going to react to situations, whether or not they'll allow you to video them. So be careful. Be careful. Make sure that anyone who does model for you understands what's to be expected, what kind of clothing they should wear, and things like that. Using presentational slides, and I showed you, some, and here's another one, Google Slides. There are templates out there to make your job a little easier, to provide some color. Various products are not created equally, though. All right, so each one has its strengths and its weaknesses. You can ask me about them, what my feelings are on them, but at this point in time, if you're in college, you probably already started to use some of them, and you already maybe understand what the weaknesses might be with one or the other. So again, I'm just here to throw out ideas. It's really up to you to pick which one you want to use and move it forward. Now, the advantages of presentational slides are, in many cases, they react expectedly. They show in an expected format. They're quite portable. You can put embedded video or audio. They have robust potential for visualizing concepts. They can be colorful, creative, but then they have disadvantages, like being bored to death by PowerPoint, right? It's part of the why I took the time to tell you the story about my like super great grandpa, George Rogers Clark, and then my own grandfather. Both of them became alcoholics. Unfortunately, it's just one of those things. I broke it up because there is a situation where we're all bored to death by PowerPoint, right? Don't PowerPoint us to death. Make sure it's creative. If I could ever show you what one of, so as I was developing this course, I reached out to one of my friends who taught at Dalton State University. It's part of the reason why we're using their textbook, because I had some feedback in the creation of that textbook, and it's Georgia State approved. So naturally, why would I go write my own textbook when someone else has already done that work for us, right? Now, I could show you what his slides are, and he's been a teacher longer than I have, but they are very uninspiring. They are very monochromatic, and they are very bullet point and nothing else. No graphics. Never any graphics, never any embedded video or audio. It is just boring to look at. Linear design actually hurts our creative thinking, which hurts our ability to process information, believe it or not, as an audience. Now, creating too much of a design, making it too crazy, too wild, too out there, also hurts critical thinking because they get distracted and they start concentrating on the design and wondering what image might come next, and you lose them for the speech. So you've got to find that happy medium. Now, this course is not about finding that happy medium. I'm just talking about presentational slides and why they're useful, why they're important, what to do and what not to do. Remember, text should be larger. I created this PowerPoint a little bit, this specific slide on purpose to show you a disadvantage of PowerPoint and other slides. If you make the font too small, you have to actually start paying more attention to, what does it say? Be careful. Always use a 20-point font or larger. Be courteous to the people that you're presenting to. Watch your colors. I did this one on purpose too. You notice it's green on top of the blue background, but it kind of gets lost in the shuffle. And it's done on purpose. I'm going to show you what not to do by actually showing you what not to do. So here's this week's participation question again for chapter 9. What is your favorite presentation tool? Is it PowerPoint, Google Slides, Prezi, or something else? Tell me why that's your preferred method of presentational tool. What do you like about it, and what don't you like about it? So that is what our question is going to be for chapter 9 on our weekly questions. Again, remember those are due on the Monday of the next week. So, all right. I usually give you about a 1 week grace period anyway, and it takes me about a week to get them graded anyway. So remember, a lot of these don't even have a right or wrong answer. I'm looking at your feelings for things like this one, and I'm doing this to get you thinking about what presentation tools you might want to use. Principles for creating high quality slideshows are unity and consistency. Make sure it's similar. If you notice my slides, they don't deviate a lot. Also, utilize emphasis and focal point as well as visibility. So meaning using, if you notice this font is 28 points. I use a very easy to read font. I use a lot of Times New Roman. It's just what I like to use. Keeps it consistent. It's easy to read. Make sure your color scheme works, right? Tone. Make sure the colors work together. Also look at your scale and proportion. You want some empty space. It's okay. It's our friend. For those who are art students, you'll know what I mean. Neutral space is a beautiful thing. Think about your scale and proportion. Make it big enough, but not too big, and overwhelming the screen. I could have made this 40-point font and gotten my point across too. It would have overwhelmed the screen and there would have been little space for anything else, right? Try to have a balance and a rhythm in your presentation. You don't want to spend 5 minutes on one slide and 2 minutes on another. Principles for creating quality slideshows, more of them. Unity and consistency, we talked about fonts, colors, we kind of touched on these things. Backgrounds, okay, backgrounds on slides, I watch them carefully, okay? It can be quite distracting. Themes, Google Slides, Prezi, all these, PowerPoint, all of these have their own themes. So you don't have to do a lot of extra creating. You can find a theme that works for you and kind of run with it. Animations, please don't, please don't. At one time, I suppose they might have been cool, but the reality is those days are done. We don't need dancing characters on the screen, words flying up, and here's why. If you do that, you run the risk of it freezing up on your PowerPoint presentation. And then you have a big problem, right? You have to have a PowerPoint, you have to have a visual aid. And if it's frozen up, it's not helping you. Points get lost that way. So please keep it simple. More principles about creating quality slideshows. We talked a little bit about the emphasis and the focal point. Again, 22 points or better is what I would use. Definitely 20 or better, always. Remember, a projected slide might look different from computer to computer to computer. It's just how the video cards in the computer process that information. If you notice, I like to utilize 7x7 or 6x6, meaning how much of the screen I'm using, where the information is located. Not all templates or designs have readable text size, so before you grab a theme and think you're running with it, make sure it all works for you. Use high contrast between your font and your background, and make sure you use a legible font. Like I told you, I use Times New Roman. Use something. I would stay away from scripts, definitely. Script typewriting. Tone. When I think about creating a tone, now this was on a campaign that I worked with a while back. I was very purposeful. This is for Students Against Drunk Driving. I was part of a chapter when I went back to school at 40 years old. I was very careful about certain things, and I'll explain them to you in this image. First of all, that is me. That is me driving the car. I was driving. Now the background, the lanes in front of me are not obviously where I was at. I actually created the background on that shot, but it literally lit the car, took the shot, and then imported the background. So it was done in Photoshop, some of it. I was purposeful about the beer I chose. Now you may say, what? I chose a non-Anheuser-Busch product because at the time I was in St. Louis, Missouri, and I did not wish to offend too many people from the area. Again, this is the Students Against Drunk Driving, not, hey, let's pick on a beer. What my tone is, though, is kind of, if you notice, I made the background a little blurry, right? I'm trying to set a tone with the blur of the background, emulating the idea of a drunk driver, thinking they're safe, everything up front is in focus. And if you notice, I step everything out of focus, even on the dashboard, all the way up to the control panel on the Audi that I had at the time that I shot this picture with. So you see, I used a lot of colors, and then I noticed the red orange in the dash, so I kind of tried to make my background emulate the red orange. Well, all these things work together. I'm not expecting you to put that much time into something, but I'm showing you how much time people purposefully put into professional imagery. Remember, your color and your images set the tone for the viewer. If you pick reds, it might put off some people. If you pick purples, it might put off some people. Too much green tends to put some people off as well. So you see, I try to balance things. I choose blue. Blue is a trusted color. You can't really go wrong with blue. Scale and proportion, if you notice, I'm really big on that, but that's because I do a lot of photography, videography as well. And in that, I'm really about balance, creating a balance. So using that empty space to help tell the story too. Notice I though dropped the font size on this slide just to show you one more time. Again, I dropped it down to 20. That's only, this is 20. So at 20 starts to get a little bit smaller, right? You want to make sure you're paying attention to those things. Now there's a slide share here if you want to click in there. It's a little class, a webinar you could take about the power of images, okay? And another tool you can use to create image, which I recommend, Canva. Canva has a free version, which students can use, or they have a pro version, which I still use even in my work today. It's much quicker than Photoshop, and if you're just trying to get passable images quickly, it's a good tool. It's not perfect like many things. But they talk more about the power of images, how to balance things, how to understand scale and proportion. It's really a nice little tool, and you can click on it if you want to. I'm not requiring you to do it, but to those that want to learn more about design, I'd advise you to click on it. Remember what I said about delivery in PowerPoint. Don't spend all your time on one slide, right? Try to keep a regular progression. Now, I'm not saying you can't spend 2 minutes on one slide and 5 minutes on another, and then come back and spend 2 minutes on the third slide. You could balance it out, but the reality is, what you don't want to do is spend most of your speech on one slide and then realize, oh, I forgot to hit the slides, and then quickly whip us through the rest of the slides. At that point, it's almost, well, basically, it's as bad as you get slightly more points than if you would have had no presentation tool at all. All right. So try to have a solid rhythm. Try to create slides to create a solid rhythm. You can use the V key or use a remote mouse even to blacken the screen if you want to do that. I'm not into that. I don't have a problem. I don't think that most of us are going to have a need for amazing reveals. Always make sure, though, that the computer using the tool and the file type are going to match up. Cite any borrowed graphics on the or text on the slide. Make sure you tell me where the information's from. You notice I didn't do that on a couple of mine on purpose, trying to get a point across. Make sure you're sharing where the information comes from. Otherwise, you're not as trusted. It's like, okay, you got some information, but where? Where did it come from? So make sure you also maintain eye contact with the audience. Again, I try to vary my eye contact even on this. I wish I had a live audience. It would be so much better, but it is what it is. Low-tech presentational aids are really cool, especially if you're very artistic. They can be awesome. I've seen dry erase, chalkboards. I've seen all kinds of flip charts, all kinds of presentational aids by this point in my career. Handouts, but thing about handout, it's going to be lost in this element because we're doing it online. Posters, a little bit will be lost because just make sure the poster is big enough when you're showing it on screen. Okay. So just think about that. We're doing this online, so you may want to think about size is going to be very important. It's going to have to be big to get the point across. In conclusion, any presentational aids must be easily seen, heard, and handled. All right? Just keep it simple. Show only when you're discussing those sections of the speech, within the speech. Right? Presentation too should match up to the speech. You notice what I said earlier? Avoid shock value and bad taste. I chose a different beer than what many people were drinking in that region because I didn't want to offend people and put them off immediately. I wanted my message to get across, not make people angry. Big difference there, right? Consider the psychological effects of color. I mentioned blue. Blue is an amazing color. Blue, we trust. Blue is inherent trust. Blue feels good. It's calming. I mean, it is a universal across all cultures. So that's why I use blue. Think about your template design. Remember, not all are created equal. I've seen some amazing templates out there, and then the text size is really pitiful and the font use is minimal. So be careful. And then relevance and support of your speech, the key components of your speech, really are the key of driving the idea of a presentational aid. It needs to make sense with the speech. If it's too creative and doesn't match up, well, at least you did it, but you're going to lose some points that way too. Make sure it matches up. Creativity is great, but make sure it lines up with your message, lines up with where your talk points are. And that's it, folks. Really, that is it for Chapter 9, Presentational Aids. So start considering which ones you're going to use. I'll post that question or the group of questions for you for Chapter 10 or for Chapter 9 due before Chapter 10 is started. Okay? Thanks ever so much. It was great being with you today. Thank you for being a great audience. I'll see you.